So now we're being recorded, and I will introduce Eres as she shares her screen. So I am going to stop my share and let her put her screen up, and I'll be introducing her as she does that. Now, the name, as I mentioned, is Anticoagulant Rodenticides and Raptors. And our presenter is Eres Gomez. And Eres has just earned, and I mean earned, her Master's of Science at UTSA. She's a hard worker, and she has been working at it for some time. And it must be a wonderful feeling when you finally get that defense done and everything. And we're so proud of you for doing that. It's a master's degree in environmental science from the University of Texas at San Antonio, where she studied raptors, which are birds of prey. And she's worked as a veterinary technician, raptor rehabilitator. Probably part of this project was because of that. And her main research interests include general raptor biology and their ecology, ecotoxicology. I love that, how you'll learn what that is during her presentation, and other issues that surround human-wildlife conflict. And tonight, this is something we all need to know more about, because there are rodent poisons that are being used in our community by individuals and companies for rodent control that are affecting critters that are not intended victims. Things like the raptors, they're highly susceptible. They get exposed when they consume the intended prey, like the rats and mice. They eat one that has eaten this poison, and then it affects their bodies. It works its way through the food chain. And it causes not only direct death, but it can cause them risk of injury and disease and predation, because it weakens their system and their Eres will tell you all about that, so I'm not going to get into that. So this is a worldwide problem, and if each of us can educate ourselves, be an educated consumer, we can avoid harming the birds that we love by getting rid of the things we don't want around. So I'm going to let her take that over and give you this presentation. And I want to thank her for giving us her time and her talent tonight. So as she presents, if you would like to put any questions that come to mind in the chat, we'll handle them at the end. So Eres, welcome, and thank you very, very much.
Thank you. Thanks for having me, Patsy and Bear Audubon. Really appreciate the opportunity to share my research, so thank you. So as Patsy was saying, I just completed my master's, studied mostly raptors, but I focused on rodenticide exposure. And so I'll tell you a little bit about what that means. Okay, so this is all about anticoagulant rodenticides, and that's kind of just a fancy word for saying rodent poisons. You'll hear me call them ARs, and it's just because I try and shorten it, just because it's a mouthful. But basically, they're what the name implies. So they're blood thinners. It's an anticoagulant. It interferes with normal blood clotting processes. A rodenticide, that word is just something that kills rodents. So they're blood thinners, and how they work is they block the vitamin K cycle. And so it inhibits the body's normal ability to clot. So then it usually leads to internal hemorrhage and other damage and internal bleeding. However, the death is delayed 3 to 10 days. This depends on a lot of things, depends on the species, the size of the individual, how much poison they've consumed. So depends on a lot of things, but I do want to say that this delay in death is intentional. These poisons are designed that way, and it's because we were using our more traditional acute methods that we used to use included things like cyanide and arsenic and strychnine, and these were fast-acting poisons. And so what that means is that when the rodent would eat the cyanide or whatever, it maybe stumbled off but died right then and there. And rodents, actually, they're not that dumb, and so they would see their buddies eating from some food, and they would say like, oh, see them dying and getting sick. And so they knew to avoid it. They termed that behavior bait shyness or bait avoidance. And so we needed a way to get around that. So we developed something that they would take a long time for it to actually kill them. So there's basically two types of ARs, or anticoagulant rodenticides. There's the first generation and then the second generation. And it's just that the first generation came out first, and they're a little bit less potent. So they're designed to where it would take multiple feedings. So the idea that the rodent would come to the bait box and then go away, take a little bit, till it slowly starts kind of having an effect on its body. The second generations came out later, and those are more fast acting. They're designed to only require one single feeding, so they're more potent, more toxic. The funny thing is that the second generations were actually created because rodents started exhibiting resistance to the first gens, and so they needed something a little bit more stronger, but they still wanted to have that delay in death, the makers of these poisons, because that's the mechanism, and it was to avoid that bait shyness or bait avoidance from happening. I'll talk a little bit more about kind of how that pathway works. I do want to mention that there are other rodenticides. They're not all anticoagulants. We just kind of lump these up as non-ARs. Bromethalin is a neurotoxin, and that one is very popular. You'll see it a lot if you go to the store and you kind of read the ingredients on the label. Another one is cholecalciferol. It's just a vitamin D overdose. Zinc phosphide, that's another one. And so there are other rodenticides, but anticoagulants are the most commonly provisioned one on the landscape. And so, and they're also maybe the most harmful. We don't really know, but they're showing to have affect a lot of different things. And I'll show you a little bit more about that. I just wanted to also say that they come in all different sizes, shapes, colors, flavors, and they're real bright and colorful like this usually. They're dispensed in bait boxes. You'll see, I don't know if you can see my cursor, but something like this. They're getting really creative with these bait boxes. They're now like different colors. They'll be like beige, kind of to more camouflage against buildings, or they have some new ones that look like rocks. And I sometimes I see new ones and I'm like, oh, that's a new one. And but they're getting really creative in trying to kind of camouflage them with the environment, because they're a bit of an eyesore, right? And people don't really want to know that that's happening. So I'm going to talk a little bit about exposure and kind of how it happens. So we have the target rodent, right? We either have an infestation or we have a perceived infestation. A lot of times people don't really have rodent problems, or like they'll use these in like shopping centers, apartment complexes. I've seen them in parks. You'll notice as you're going around town, if you keep your eye out, you're going to see these little black boxes all over the place. And so we're targeting the rodent. And it's actually really, if you're in a city center, it's really only 3 species of rodent, and they're invasive species. So it's the roof rat, the Norway rat, and the house mouse. And so it's the idea that we have rodents, we put this poison out, and the rodents would come and eat it and then die. But so this type of exposure is called direct or primary, and that's when the animal directly eats the bait. Non-target exposure is when other non-target species end up eating this, and this does occur. It is documented as having happened. A lot of times the rodents will either chew off chunks or drag, these little baits out, depending on how they're being provisioned. And so that gives a lot of access to a lot of other organisms, and they do get exposed that way. And again, that's the non-target exposure. So there's also indirect exposure, or secondary, tertiary, etc. And this is when something like, an owl eats a rodent that ate the poison. So it's not that the owl is necessarily going to the bait and eating the bait itself, but it's eating something that ate the bait. In the case of tertiary exposure, you could have, like, let's say the sparrow, munches on some of this bait. The opossum comes and eats the sparrow that's probably dead, laying somewhere, and then the owl is eating the, hunts the possum, now that's a three-way, so that's a tertiary exposure. And so it's a little complicated, but this is how the exposure pathway usually occurs. I'm going to talk a little bit more about that because it's important, and it can get kind of confusing, at least for me. This is a toxic food web. This design is from Kim Smith. She does designs for the organization Raptors Are the Solution. I'll mention them a little bit later on. And this is a good example. I know it's kind of drawn and a little bit cartoony, but I think it does a good job of showing how it just is, reaches everything within the food web. I studied raptors specifically, and raptors are very much affected. That's why you see the owl at the top of the food chain. If you want to learn more about that, my advisor, Dr. Jennifer Smith, and another researcher named Sophie Heinmark and myself recently published a paper earlier this year that's kind of a short, concise summary on the effects of raptors. I'd be happy to share that with anyone. And so raptors are kind of maybe the poster child and kind of what got promoted awareness and how we got, to know that this was happening, but they're not the only animal affected. There's a lot of reports of non-raptorial birds, passerines and other birds not being affected or documented as having AR exposure. Mountain lions and bobcats. There's a lot of research right now. They're one of the most affected as well. Mountain lions and bobcats will often exhibit mange, so it weakens their immune system and they get an onset of mange. So that's kind of like a double whammy. Coyotes too. Coyotes, a lot of studies coming out on coyotes, and they are also a lot of times will be prone to mange as well. But I mean, the list goes on and on. It's, white-tailed deer, foxes, a lot of foxes have been documented as having AR exposure, raccoons, skunks. A bat study came out, a new one, reptiles, was just recently, that's the first one to document reptile exposure. Fish, these two studies were in Germany. So they documented exposure of ARs in fish, and that was actually getting through in the wastewater. Invertebrates, we've seen invertebrates, we have documented invertebrates being exposed to this. It's in the water and soil, and that's how the invertebrates are getting exposed. And most importantly, pets, children, and human exposure. It's estimated that between 12 to 15,000 children are accidentally poisoned each year in the US because like I showed earlier, they look bright, they're colorful, it looks like candy. I think the drive home message is that these are pervasive. Once they get in the environment, there's no way to take them out. And they just stay there, they persist, and they travel up the food chain, and it's just bad for everyone all around. So I just kind of want to go again real quickly through how it happens. First, the rodent eats the bait. It starts to become ill and slow moving. It might have to go back and take another bite depending on what you're using, but it eventually becomes slow, easy, looks like an easy prey target for something like a hungry owl or some other predator. And then now when that owl or whatever else eats it, now he becomes poisoned as well. And so again, the animal, like the owl, doesn't have to directly eat the bait, but whatever he ate, if that ate the bait, then he gets poisoned too. So my research focused mainly on raptors. And when I say raptors, I mean, the big predatory birds like hawks, owls, eagles, falcons, vultures, and kites, those kinds of birds. And raptors are highly susceptible because a lot of raptor species have very high rodent diets. What I mean is that like a lot of raptors, a bulk of their diet is made up of rodents. For example, barn owls on average will eat about 90% of their diet is made up of rodents. So that's a lot of rodents. And one barn owl can eat 1,000 rodents in 1 year. So they have a very close relationship with these rodents because it's their food source. So again, they are exposed when they consume contaminated prey or carrion. So a lot of our scavengers also are exposed this way through the carrion. Some of the lethal effects are coagulopathy, which is just like blood disorders, right? I mentioned earlier that it causes blood clotting disorders and interferes with the normal clotting processes. That can have cascading effects on the body. It's going to cause organ failure. Usually what happens is internal bleeding is the main symptom that you're going to see. And then ultimately it will end in death if they get enough of these poisons. But there's also sublethal effects. And so these sublethal effects are just kind of like indirect effects. And it's just the idea that if these animals are being poisoned, then, it makes them more prone to injury, to disease, to predation. And it just kind of causes them to get more in trouble and, not be at their fittest. So raptors have been sampled from all over the world. Well, most of the world, and we have the evidence is growing, the body of literature is growing. These are just some numbers here. So on average, between 10 and 84% of barn owls have been documented as having ARs in their system. Between 65 and 100% of great horned owls, between 75 and 92% of barred owls, 87% of eastern screech owls. There was a couple of studies that came out of like West US looking at northern spotted owls because they are threatened. And so there was 70% of those were had ARs in their system. And it may not be too much of a problem, like, red-shouldered hawks, like this one here, pictured here, and great horned owls. They seem like they're plentiful. Maybe they're not declining, so it's not much. Maybe it's not much of an issue, but it does become more of an issue when you're dealing with, threatened or species that are declining, like northern spotted owls. And exposure has been documented in such vulnerable species like golden eagles, common kestrels in Europe, and then red kites. That are all, I think the red kites are red listed. I'm not sure about the other two, but so again, may not be a big deal if you're talking about great horned owls, which are plentiful, but when you're talking about, effects to these other species that are declining, then it becomes more of a concern. So yeah, if an owl eats a poison rodent, it just makes it more prone to becoming, but what I'm trying to say is it can't fly or hunt properly. And this, like I said, makes it more prone to injury, to disease, predation. One of the main reasons that raptors are admitted into rehabilitation is entanglement with barbed wire, and vehicle collisions are really big for raptors. They're a big problem. Especially owls, maybe, it's because they're hunting at night and cars don't see them. But it's just the idea that these owls, as they're being poisoned, they're not at their fittest, and they're not going to be able to function quite as well. If the owl eats enough poison rodents to reach lethal levels, it can cause a slow, painful death. Like I said, there's a delay, right? Anywhere 3 to 10 days, depending on the size of the animal. And it's not a humane way to go. It's very sad. The adults are not the only ones that are affected, because parents can bring unsuspecting nestlings food, contaminated rodents, and they can feed them to their nestlings. And studies have documented exposure in nestlings, and it has been shown to interfere with chick development and survival. So we still need some more research done on nestlings and fledglings, but there are some accounts of it occurring. So that's kind of concerning. There's a lot of studies around the world that have shown all kinds of raptors to be exposed. Owls are one of the most exposed because a lot of owls eat rodents. It's anywhere between 65 and 100% of owls worldwide have been exposed to rodenticides. I just made this little map here, and it's kind of got some of the species that are documented in the literature as being exposed to rodenticides. And we're missing like a lot of information from South America. So it's kind of scattered, as you can see all on this map. But if you look over here at the US, in North America, most of the research is coming out of Canada, a lot of stuff coming out of Canada. In the US, California, there's a lot on the West Coast in California that's been done, and then also on the East Coast, on the Northeast. But there's a lot of information lacking in the Southern United States, and especially in Texas. And so this attempt, my thesis was an attempt to try and investigate what was going on here locally, in our region. So I'm going to switch gears a little bit here and start talking about raptor rehabilitation. And that's because the owls that I sampled were from the Raptor Rehab Center. So just to start off, what raptor rehabilitation is, it's just providing medical care to sick, injured, and orphaned birds of prey. And it's always with the intent of returning them back to the wild. So that's the goal. Around 50,000 raptors are admitted into rehab each year in North America. That's a lot of raptors. And most of them are due to human-related causes. And so the data from these raptor centers can provide very valuable information on some of the threats that they face, and it can help aid conservation and how to manage these species. I will say that one of the most common, I guess, questions or comments I get is like, isn't the data biased because it's coming from a raptor rehab center? And I will say, yes, I agree, it is biased. However, it does still provide valuable insight into some of the threats that they're facing. The thing is, it's really hard to get a hold of raptors. You know, like it's really hard to get a hold of them to study them. And so if they're coming in here and they're dying at the rehab centers, sometimes that's the only option that we have to study them. So we have to just take advantage of that. And I will say that it is a very small, it's not representative. The raptors that are admitted into rehab are not representative of all the populations, or the wild populations, because it's a very small, percentage of raptors that are actually being found by someone, driven or brought to the rehab center. And so, again, it's not representative of the populations in the wild, but it does give us some insight. And right now, it's kind of like the only thing that we have, and the only access that we have to study these birds. So there's a lot of good information that we can get from the rehab centers. And so as part of my thesis, that's what I also did, was I looked at the admissions records and the data that was coming into the 2 rehab centers that serve the San Antonio area. And the Last Chance Forever is the main one. They deal mostly with just raptors. The other one is wildlife rescue and rehabilitation. They kind of see everything. They have all kinds of animals there, but they do take in a good amount of raptors. Altogether, I looked at almost 4,000 admission records. So that's almost 4,000 individual birds admitted into rehab. And just kind of some of the numbers. So Last Chance Forever had about 27 different species coming in over an 11-year period. I had a lot of data to work with from Last Chance. And on average, they received 185 raptors per year. Wildlife rescue numbers were a little bit different. They had about 18 species that total that they had. I looked at 6 years worth of data, so I didn't have that many years there. And they received about 305 raptors per year. So they actually received more individual birds each year as far as raptors go. Some of the most admitted, I've got the top like several that were admitted here. Great horned owl. Great horned owl was the top bird admitted to Last Chance Forever. I just want to say these numbers right here, this is the sample size. So this is just saying there were 449 great horned owls admitted to Last Chance Forever over the 11-year period. And so if we look down at wildlife rescue, they also had a good amount of great horned owls, 299 admitted over 6 years from wildlife rescue. Red-shouldered hawk was another very common one. We have a lot of them here, right? They're in our backyards. They're a very common bird. We see them all around. And so they were admitted frequently. Screech owls are also admitted frequently. Red-tailed hawks are another one. Barred owls, we get a lot of barred owls into rehab. Black vultures, yep, most of the black vultures are like vehicle collisions because they're scavenging on the road. And then we have a good amount of Cooper's hawks that are admitted into rehab. So I just want to talk a little bit about liver sampling. So this is how traditionally raptors are sampled for AR poisons. And you can use all kinds of biological tissues. You can use blood, plasma, liver, hair, and muscle tissue. It's interesting, the hair was actually used for human studies, not from the US, but they were from somewhere else. But you can use all kinds of biological tissues to actually sample for the ARs. However, the liver is the best one. It's going to give you the most complete chemical profile to see what poisons or toxins this animal has been exposed to. But you do need, unfortunately, the animal does have to pass on in order to get that liver sample. And so traditionally, that's how we sample for ARs, is by using livers. And previous studies have demonstrated widespread AR exposure in wild raptors through liver sampling. And most of the time, those birds are admitted into rehab or wildlife hospitals and clinics, and that's how we get access to them. So for example, in North America, these are 3 of the biggest studies that have been done in North America. So 70% of raptors admitted in Canada were positive for ARs. And I believe that was 4 different species. It was like 3 owls and a red-tailed hawk. There's Dr. Murray. She does a lot of work in Massachusetts. She's a veterinarian, and she's been looking at AR exposure very closely. So in 2011, she found that 86% of the raptors admitted there had ARs in their system. And then more recently, she did another study in 2020 where she found that 100% of red-tailed hawks were positive for ARs. I believe they only tested 43 that had come in. So they had 43 red-tailed hawks that came in that time for that study period. And all of them had ARs in their system. It doesn't mean that the ARs are what killed the bird. We can't really say for sure what it is. I mean, we can make a guess, right, depending on the symptoms that the bird is exhibiting, or depending on the amounts of concentration. If they have like just lethal levels, I mean, we can maybe infer that could have been, maybe that was what caused it, but we can't say for sure. Because the raptors that are admitted into rehab, they come with like a plethora of things going on. They don't just, it doesn't, and AR exposure is very cryptic. So, it's not like it just jumps up at you and says, this is why the bird dies. They come in with multiple, fractures, broken limbs. They're covered in mites. I mean, they've just got like all kinds of conditions by the time that they get to the rehab center. And it's always a guessing game. It's like you're doing detective work trying to figure it out. I wish so much that we could ask the bird and say, hey, what happened to you? Give us a medical history, but we can't do that. And so we have to just kind of piece together and figure out what's going on. And so these results suggest that AR exposure is prominent in raptors, but it's not usually written down in the books or in the record as the main cause of death. And that's problematic just because, for the reasons I mentioned, because it's just difficult to say whether or not it really killed it. But it does give us some insight into what's going on and possibly what it could have contributed to their decline and their demise. And so now I want to talk a little bit about how I sampled for my livers and the AR analysis. But I think it's very important to mention that absolutely no animals were euthanized for the purpose of this study. And all samples were collected under federal, state, and approved state and federal permits. But again, none of the birds were euthanized just to test for the ARs. Okay, so they all either died or were dead on arrival, they died while they were in rehabilitation, or they were euthanized because their injuries were just too severe to let them go on. And that in that instance, that was the humane thing to do. And so no animals were euthanized just to test them. What I did was I collected at least 2.5 grams of fresh whole liver tissue. I collected a total of 70 livers from 13 different species, and this collection period spanned July 2020 to September 2021. And then I froze the samples until they were ready to be transported for processing. They were processed at Texas A&M Veterinary Medical Diagnostic Laboratory, which is over at College Station. The test that they run is a liquid chromatography mass spectrometry test. They tested for 8 anticoagulants or 8 AR compounds. They tested for first generations and then 4 second generations. I've got the names here of those compounds. And these are the ones that are most commonly still used today. So that's why the facility runs the test only on those 8. There are more ARs, but these are kind of the ones that are mostly, I guess, in the market or circulating in the system. These are just some pictures of some of the birds. You know, I was getting ready to do 3 necropsies right here. And then these are just the tubes. After I collected the livers, I just freeze them and until they're ready to go and be transported. So again, these are some of the results from the liver sampling, okay? So I tested 25 owls. If you remember earlier, I said I collected 70 liver samples total, but the test is very expensive. And so we only had enough funds to test 25. So I ended up doing 20 great horned owls and 5 barred owls. And what I found was that 52% of the 25 owls that I tested, they were 52%, which was 13 birds out of 25, had at least 1 AR in their system at the time of death. So that was 60% of the great horned owls and 20% of the barred owls. It was only 1 barred owl. So just some little bit more information about what I found. So 83% of the great horned owls that tested positive had multiple ARs, which means that they had more than 1 AR in their system. In a little while, I'll show you a table from my thesis that kind of shows those amounts and what poisons were found. But 39% of all the birds I tested were within the lethal range. The lethal range is considered to be anything greater than 100 nanograms per gram of wet weight. That's how it's measured. So you just need to know it's greater than 100. That's considered to be like lethal or toxic, to where there's a good chance that it maybe, again, we can't say that it killed them, but we can, safely say that there's a good chance that it contributed to the cause of death, or whatever led to the cause of death. And just real quick, so none of the birds were admitted for ARs. So none of the birds that were admitted into rehab, they weren't able to say these birds died or were admitted because they had rodenticides. They were admitted for other things. So 46% of those birds were admitted for bodily injury, which was cause unknown. That just means that they come to us and, they have a broken wing, they have a broken leg. We don't know anything else about it. We don't know how they got it. Could have been a car, could have been a window collision. We don't know, but this is the injury they have. Then 39% had no information. No information is really common. We get birds into the rehab that they're just, there's no physical injuries on them. There's no blood, there's no disease, signs of disease. They look perfectly fine on the outside, but they're not acting fine, and they're very lethargic. Sometimes they'll be pale, but sometimes they're just slumped over and they don't want to move. But we'd have no other information in what's going on. So that's kind of what that means. This is just a map showing the rescue locations of the 25 owls that were sampled. So the black marker dots are the negative results. So those are the negative birds, and the red marker dots are the positive birds. I do have, so this red marker is like in Baytown. I got 1 owl from Baytown. And then over here was Del Rio. So that one was positive. This was Laredo. The Laredo bird was negative. But most of them are around the San Antonio area. And that's not because more birds are being poisoned or, testing positive for rodenticides around San Antonio. It's just that during the study period or the collection period, these were the birds that came to me. I was just collecting everything I could get my hands on that passed. I was collecting just whatever liver samples I could get. And so for the 25 owls that I did sample, this is where they came from. Most of the birds come from in and around San Antonio because I think detection is higher there, right? You've got more activity. People are out, they're driving their cars. They're, a lot of times these birds end up in your yard or literally at your front door. And so it's just it's more of a detection, and those are the birds that are being brought to the rehab center. You know, there could be birds dying out here in more of the rural areas. We don't know. It's just that these are the ones that were found, and these are the ones that I was able to test. Okay, so this is a table from my thesis, and it has a little bit more details on each of the birds. So again, the species, this is the 25 birds I tested, the 20 great horned owls and the 5 barred owls. This ID band number is just kind of an identification number that we give them in the center to know who's who. Doesn't really mean anything. Cause of admission, this is the cause that was assigned when they were brought into the rehab center. And so we can, looking at this, there's a few unknowns. It means we didn't have any information. And then you see a few bodily injuries, lots of wing injuries, right? A few entrapments. Again, I had mentioned earlier, barbed wire is a big thing, right? Getting caught in barbed wire. So it kind of a little varied. There was 2 electrocution cases that we had, but and one known, I think 1 or 2 known vehicle collisions. And that was, you know, somebody either saw it or they were the one that maybe hit the bird and brought it in. Okay, and so I did test for 8 AR compounds, but only 4, these were the only 4 that were detected. And so we have 3 second generations, that's what that SGAR means. And then there was 1 first generation that was detected. And I've got in red are the lethal amounts. So again, I have it down here, everything or anything over 100 nanograms per gram of wet weight is considered to be lethal or toxic. And so I did have quite a few that had some really high numbers. A few of these owls had, you know, like this one here had several, I mean, more than 1 rodenticide and high levels of more than 1 rodenticide. Again, this one too. And then let's see, my star owl, one blue, my star owl had all 4 rodenticides. So, you know, it really is amazing that they even survived as long as they did. But it's just really, it's really crazy. But that's the results there. And so I'm just going to do a little quick summary of the research results here. So this project focused on assessing anticoagulant exposure in raptors, and the raptors were admitted into rehab in San Antonio or in and around San Antonio. Over half of the owls that I tested had at least 1 AR in their system, and many of those were within the lethal range. And these results demonstrate that rehabilitation data in the absence of toxicological testing might not identify the AR exposure, but it still provides valuable information. And so these key findings will help facilitate just environmental monitoring of contaminants and some of the threats that raptors are facing in regards to ARs. Okay, so now, you know, what can you do, right? That's kind of the important thing. And so there's a lot of things that you can do. Being an advocate, first of all, and kind of spreading the word and, you know, telling your friends, telling your family some of these things you've learned, and maybe giving alternatives, which is what I was going to provide you right now. And just kind of awareness, I think, is really important. So first of all, sanitation. Sanitation is really important. And this can be real simple, right? A lot of times trash cans, we don't realize that the rodents are we're making it easy, accessible for food and trash. And so even things as simple as keeping trash bins secured, or, you know, you can buy the locks, even just putting a rock on top of your trash can sometimes so they won't get in there. Sometimes you'll see like dumpsters, and they'll have, you know, the trash is like overflowing outside of the dumpster. And then if you look more closely, you can see like bait boxes around there. And it's just kind of like, you know, if you just made some sanitation measures, then, you know, it would limit or discourage the rodents from coming, because this is basically a buffet to these rodents. I mean, you have all this trash and, you know, food for them, and then you're going and you're putting bait next to it. You know, it's like, that's like a, you know, a full buffet for them. So that's a real simple thing we can do. I think Poison Free Malibu, they have some more information I'll provide later on. It's an organization that does advocacy work for this cause. They have some information on like a dumpster ordinance, I think they called it, where they started going around the city and just putting like locks on the dumpsters and just making sure that the dumpsters were closed. And they were surprised at how much of a difference that made. So something as simple as that. Another thing you can do is seal access points into your home. So you want to look around. You got to remember that rodents can squeeze through the size of, I've heard different things, the size of a dime I've heard, or the size of a quarter, but they can squeeze in through really tight spaces. And so you can go around your house. The cold weather's coming soon, right? This is a good time to do it before it gets too cold and they start kind of seeking refuge and warmth and looking for places to go into. You're going to want to focus on like electrical outlets or piping. There might be like some gaps that maybe you can stick something in there. You can use like those what are they, like scrubby bristle kind of for washing dishes? I forget the name, but it's like a pad, you know, a bristle pad. You can just shove that in there for a simple quick fix until you can maybe caulk it or whatever. But that's another thing you can do. And then traps, there's all kinds of different traps. I do caution against using the sticky traps or the glue boards. Those catch a lot of other bycatch. So we want to like try and stay away from that. And I don't know about the snap traps. I kind of hear both things. I have seen a few instances with bycatch get caught in those. But these are the best. The metal ones are the humane traps because it doesn't harm the animal, and if you can release it, maybe in a more rural area somewhere else. But the other ones are actually pretty cool. I've never tried them. I've heard good things about these rat zappers. It's instant. It's humane. It's right away, and it's clean. And so you can just toss it in the trash, or you can toss it in for a meal for like a vulture or something. But again, there's no contaminants. There's no like secondary effects. And then they have these that like have CO2. So you put a bait up here, the rat goes inside and eats from the bait and gets a gust of CO2, knocks him out. And again, it's clean. There's no contaminants. So you can do whatever you want with it. And natural deterrents. I personally like natural deterrents. They take a little bit more time. It's not going to work, first try, but they do work pretty well. That's actually the thing that I have used besides putting a rock on top of the trash can. And so I've had several times we've had rodents. Most recently, I had one in the chicken coop that took like maybe 3 tries only, which I was happy with that it only took 3 tries, but I used peppermint oil. They're really easy to make. You just, I can send you some recipes. I'll give my email in a little bit, but you just mix the peppermint oil with water and like soap, and then you can just spray it. I was calling them my peppermint chickens because the coop kind of smelled like peppermint, but yeah, I like natural deterrents a lot. So, those are some easy things you can do. There's also some other things I can be happy to provide information with that. But the number one thing is, try not to use poison because, as we said, there's a lot of known problems with the poison. If you want to learn more, you can visit Raptors Are the Solution. Is a great organization. They've done a lot of work. They're based in California, and they've got a lot of like litigation going. There's a few other states like Massachusetts and Connecticut, and I think there's another one that are starting to get some laws going and regulations on these poisons to kind of try and limit what's available on the market. And Poison Free Malibu is another good one, another good resource to go to. And if you find an injured raptor, the best thing to do is if you can try to call Last Chance Forever, and you can try to call Wildlife Rescue, but they're always real busy. And the best thing, honestly, to do is just take it over there if you can. Last Chance Forever is over by the airport. And so go anytime between 9 and 6. And there's a big cowbell out there. So if nobody's there, because it's a 2-acre property, if nobody's there, ring that cowbell real hard and somebody will come and, but it's actually better if you can bring it to them because they don't have a way of going out to you. If you can't do that, wildlife rescue is another good one. Wildlife rescue has volunteers that they can give a call and try to get someone to come out to your property to get the raptor. But again, if you can get it over there, that's the best thing. They have a San Antonio location on Bassey Road. But if you're closer to Candalia, that's the main facility there. So you just take it in over there. And I forget the hours. It's maybe like something similar, 9 to 6 or something like that. You can find it online. There's the websites for more information. I do caution that for you to use caution during the nesting and fledging season, because we get a lot of raptors that are juveniles that they're learning how to fly, they're branching, they end up on the ground. They're perfectly healthy. There's nothing wrong with them. Mom and dad are right there. And people, they mean well, they mean it well in their hearts. They don't know, but they take them and then they take them to the rehab center. And that kind of causes more problems because not only are these facilities overrun during the nesting season, but the best thing for that raptor is for it to be with its parents. And so, a human trying to raise it, now we have to worry about imprinting and, we can try and give them the diet that they need, but we don't know if that's going to really, be adequate. Mom and dad know best. And so in that case, if you have a nestling or a fledgling, I would say just to try and give them a call or look online. They have some, I know Last Chance Forever, they did a video on their Facebook page where they kind of talked about, how do you tell if a little juvenile or nestling or fledgling needs to be rescued, or is it okay? And there's some kind of things that you can go through to make sure that you're not kidnapping it, in other words. But that's what you can do. So acknowledgements, first of all, I'd just like to thank my graduate advisor, Jennifer Smith, and the Smith Lab of Avian Ecology at UTSA. This is where I did my research, and they were very instrumental, and Dr. Smith is great in helping with everything. So thank you very much to the two facilities, Last Chance Forever and Wildlife Rescue and Rehabilitation. This is where I got my data. This is where I got the birds to test. And then I worked at Last Chance Forever. So this is actually where I did the necropsies and stuff. And then A&M, the Veterinary Medical Diagnostic Laboratory, because this is the facility that ran the tests for me. And a special thank you to Ann and Chuck Parrish, Tom and Patsy Inglet, and San Antonio Audubon Society, because they helped with financial assistance and they sponsored some of the liver sampling. So without you, this would not be possible. So thank you very much. Here's my email if you have any questions or you want to reach out or whatever. If you want any of the resources, any of the papers that I cited, I'm happy to provide any of that. Or if you just want information on, where to read up more on how to become an advocate and what you can do. But that's all I've got. So I'll stop sharing now. Oh, I can't hear you, Patsy. I think you're muted.
Thank you. I did that during the thing. Okay. And of course, the first one you want to see is from Dr. Jen Smith herself, who's on. And I agree with her that it was an excellent talk. It covered everything where, about the science, all this is based on your science. And, the conclusions we draw have a basis for them, and we love that. So I wanted to mention some of the things that were in the chat. Greg Pastor has said that, I'm going to get up here, to close holes, still wool that you can get at Lowe's. That's the stuff that, no, I wouldn't want to crawl through it, and I'm sure even a mouse wouldn't either. That's a real stopgap until you can do a repair. And he says, I so appreciate and admire that you're tackling this difficult problem. We had neighbors at one point who would throw handfuls of these pellets into the alley. I picked them up. Don't tell. I think people really need to come to terms with rats, and in order to change this insanity, I have to live trap year round rats to almost basin for the red-shouldered hawks. It never stops. So I think this is what the whole point of this presentation. I know your whole point was to help the birds and to help sustain the ecosystem. We're poisoning ourselves because we are part of we're getting poisoned by these things too. So if anyone has another question, Eris, I would really love to have on our website the recipes for natural deterrents, things like that. If you could send some things like that, we will post them and we will make this available on our website. So people,
I would love to. I'll do that.
Great. No hurry, but when you do, we'll get them up there and we appreciate that. And then we had a question about a recording. Yes, we've recorded this presentation, including any questions that come up at the end. And it will be posted on the Bear Audubon Vimeo channel tomorrow. Okay, it takes a while for it to be converted and posted. So if you miss something, if you want to watch something or stop it and write something down or whatever, you can do that. To find out how to get to that, you just go to Bear Audubon's website under meetings. And at the bottom of that page, it says, in case you missed it. And if you want to review or you missed part of it, I know I go on there and just watch the presentations that I've enjoyed. So we will have that on the Vimeo tomorrow. Pardon? Oh, yes. Tom reminded me. Wildlife Rescue just sent an email today. And they, in a very short time, they're going to move from the Bassey Road place over on, I can't remember the name of the address, but if you go on the website, it will have that information. By doing that, they're going to be able to transport the animals that are brought into the San Antonio receiving center really often up to the Candelia place where they have a lot of veterinary care, better veterinary care quicker. So by doing this, they're going to change. But if you go on the website, and I think the phone number would be the same because it's a Candelia number, but please spread this information on your neighborhood blogs. And if anyone, I know every week I have people that ask, what is this animal, or what's happening here, or is this a dangerous animal or whatever. Please post these kinds of things on your Nextdoor and your other neighborhood blogs, and give people the website of Wildlife Rescue and also Last Chance Forever if it happens to be a raptor. So spread the word about who can help these animals as well. And if to get them to the either one of these, if you can just take a towel and wrap around the raptor and put it in a cardboard box. You don't have to do anything. Just watch for the talons and the beak, because they do operate. But get it to a professional as fast as possible. And it's better to take them to a wildlife rehabilitator than to a veterinarian, because they don't specialize in wild animals. So now I have a question about testing. Now, right now you have to wait till you have a dead animal and do liver testing, and it's very expensive and all these things. You mentioned that hair had been used in human studies and probably some others. I know they used to test for arsenic poisoning by human hair. Is there any way to be able to use like a feather or something on a bird to at least identify that ARs are in their system, so that you can do it on a live animal, in other words?
Yeah. So there hasn't been anything looking at using feathers or something like that with raptors or wildlife, but I have come across a few studies that looked at chickens, like on poultry farms and stuff, using eggshells. But there's nobody, I think, really kind of diving into that anymore. So that's the problem, is you can use blood. So if the animal is alive, you can pull blood. But the thing with blood is that the ARs have a shorter half-life in the blood. So what I'm saying is that you can test for blood, but what it's gonna tell you is recent exposure. So perhaps the animal metabolized it and it passed out of it, and so you have to catch it at the right time. And then so it's more of a detection issue with that. But yeah, there's really nothing going on looking at feathers and or like eggshells, for example. But I think it has to do also with the behavior of the ARs. And so again, we just need more research done into this. Hopefully someone will kind of look into it. I kind of seem to remember there's a couple of papers that recently came out that I need to read. I have them saved, but I believe they were hopefully making some progress in using blood, because that would be really beneficial if these raptors were coming in to the rehab center, pull blood from them. With that said, there is kind of like a precautionary treatment that you can do, since I mentioned it, the way the ARs work is they inhibit or they block vitamin K. So one of the treatments is that you can actually administer vitamin K like intravenously. You can put it in a saline or the fluids, and you can just get it. It doesn't hurt them if they're not suffering from that. It's not going to hurt them. And you can do that as a precaution. There are some rehab centers in the nation that are doing that, but it's only a handful. And again, I think this is just an awareness issue. It's so cryptic, and a lot of people, in California, they really know this is going on. In Massachusetts, because of Dr. Murray that I mentioned in her studies, they know this is going on. She's in charge of a veterinary hospital there. And so she's integrated that procedure into their routine. If a raptor comes in and we think maybe it has rodenticide, let's give it vitamin K. But in other locations like in here where this is so novel, we still don't really know, we're not aware that it's really happening. But I think that give that time, and I'm hoping that eventually maybe
we get to spread the word for you, and we'll be happy to do that to help. If all the people out there that are listening will help us, we will help us spread the word. I had one question when Eris and I were talking before the program about, like, if I'm going to the store, the best thing is don't use poison. But if you have someone who's going to use, if you're going to go look at poison, you have to, I said, how do you know whether it's an anticoagulant? And they have to list the ingredients, right? Yes. And you Google it. And I did it while I was talking to her. I took one of those second generation names and I just copied it and I Googled it, and it came up. It's an anticoagulant poison that's very lethal, and right on Wikipedia. So if you see anything on a product you might have around the house, maybe, or somebody does, just check it out before you use it. Okay, let's see. Here's another question from Greg. From have the pest control, excuse me, I'm gonna have to get that up. Sorry.
Okay, I see it.
Question, have the pest control companies been receptive to changing their techniques?
Okay, so I would say no, but that's because, well, here, people still aren't, I guess the companies aren't really being told, like here in Texas and San Antonio, I don't know if anyone is telling the pest control company, like, hey, these anticoagulants are causing problems. I think you would have to wait, like I would have to wait till they come to my house or whatever, and then I ask them. But in California, where they've actually started to put legal restrictions on this, enforcing the pest control companies to comply. There it's a little bit different. I think here they're just not acknowledging that it's happening, and I've heard from first-hand accounts from people that have called pest control, and they've asked specifically, like, is this harmful? They'll flat out lie and say no, and it's not true. So what you need to do is, if you have a problem or whatever, in the pest control company wants to put something out, again, like Patsy was saying, you ask them, what's the name of it? What's the chemical compound name? And even if you have like a brand name or something, you could look that up too, and then find out the exact compound it is. But I think it's just not being acknowledged is kind of what I would say. The other thing is that these bait boxes are, by federal law from the EPA, they're supposed to have a label on them that says what's in them. I've talked at length about this with the owner of Raptors Out of Solution, and then some other folks at Poison Free Malibu. I've talked to them about this. Here in Texas, every bait box I have seen does not have a label. I have never seen a bait box here with a label. And what I'm talking about is, like, if you go to a restaurant, you go to a shopping center, whatever, and you see a bait box there, they're supposed to have a label and tell you what's on it. You shouldn't have to touch it or anything. It should be right there on the front. So there's a lot of, I guess, rules aren't being followed, but they're not being enforced at the same time. And ultimately, it's up to the state. So it's left at the state level, like a lot of our laws are left at the state level. So it's up to the state really to come in and say that. And the problem, well, I don't want to call it a problem, but with Texas, the Texas Department of Agriculture is the one that is in charge of regulating pesticides. And so that's very, very different than California, who has like they have their own EPA. It's a California Environmental Protection Agency or something like that. So again, just different, different regions, different rules and laws governing all these mechanisms. But I don't think that the pest control companies have been receptive, and I don't think it's being acknowledged or, even talked about. So,
well, then I think, yeah, well, I think we can be our own advocates if we are, we educate ourselves, and all of us have been educated tonight. And if we do have a problem and we hire someone to come, I think it's important that we ask what they're using, and we educate ourselves as to any collateral damage that can happen. We had a terrible photo brought in about one of these sticky traps where a bird had been caught in it, and those things are just terrible. So just spread the word, educate yourself, and we can at least be part of the solution instead of part of the problem. And then we can work in the system to, advocate for fewer poisons, because we live in the same environment that these things are in. So yeah, I think that's the big message.
If you do absolutely have to use poison, there is one that is sodium chloride, so it's just like a overdose of salt, and it's cellulose. And so that one, we don't really know if it's causing other harm or secondary effects to other wildlife, but so far it seems to be kind of a safer option. I don't advocate for using any poison at all, but if you have to, maybe give that one a try before something else. There's also a product called Contrapest that I had learned about, and it's basically a contraceptive. And it's like you'll just provision it in that bait box, but it's like a milk that they come into the bait box and drink. And so it doesn't harm them because it doesn't kill them. It doesn't do anything like that. It just makes them unable to reproduce, but they have to keep eating it. And so it's the idea that slowly over time, that rodent population that's living there would start to diminish. So if I understand that the poisons are fast, they're easy, right? You just put it out and you don't have to think about it, and you don't have to deal with a dead rat. I understand that. And for some people, elderly people or people that can't actually get up and do these things, maybe that's the only option they have. So I do understand that. The Contrapest, they just recently made that available for general consumers. I believe the little starter kit is like $100. I don't know how long it lasts or anything, but you can buy it online. I'm happy to provide some of that. I'm going to put my email in the chat just one more time in case anyone reach out.
Yes, and if it's in the chat, we'll put it in the write-up of your presentation on Vimeo as well. Okay, we're going to close out here pretty soon because the time is moving on here. But we have also someone who commented, you can report illegal or improper use of pesticides for investigation. A lot of enforcement relies on reporting and investigation. So if you have some joker coming over to tell you that this is not hurting anything and you look it up and it is, well, don't take it laying down, you know, just report it to, there must be some organization that somewhat, if nothing else, to the Better Business Bureau, you know. So don't just take it. So Eres, this has been a fabulous education. I've learned so much. I think everybody feels the same. And if anybody has any parting comment before we sign off tonight, I would like to hear it. If not, I want to thank you so much for doing such a great job of combining your scientific research with practical things that all of us can do to help. And really, really appreciate it. So,
well, thank you to Bear Audubon for, you know, giving me the opportunity to kind of share this, and hopefully we can help spread the word and, you know, help these birds out and this wildlife out and kind of put a stop to this. So
that's our aim, and I know we all share that. And thanks to everyone who is with us tonight. Thanks to Becca for her help, and for all of you who spent your time with us tonight. We appreciate it, and we hope you'll check with us on the Bear Audubon site and participate in other events and opportunities in the future. So everyone, have a wonderful rest of your evening, and I know you join me in thanking Eris again. So good night and see ya. Good birding. Bye-bye.